Good morning. This is Deb Watson, and today we have a fun exercise in working wet on wet with stormy skies. Trace your outline onto a good quality watercolor paper like arches. Next, pick your colors. You can use a blue-gray that you mix yourself with blue plus brown, or you could use a tube gray like Payne's gray, or you could even just mix your blue with the black to make a blue-gray. Basically, the sky needs to be darker at the top and lighter as it goes towards the ground. To make wet on wet easy, wet your paper completely on the front and the back. If your paper is soaking wet and not taped down, it's going to stretch evenly and lay flat. That makes it a lot easier for working wet on wet. I dump a lot of water on my paper, and then I drip off the excess. You could also soak your paper in a pan of water for a few minutes. Start with a light layer of your blue-gray. I mixed my gray with cobalt and burnt sienna. You can paint this right over the house in the foreground too. Next, start adding more paint so the sky will be darker at the top, but keep it light at the bottom. At this point, you can play with it and see how the clouds might look, and just get a feel for working wet on wet. For the clouds, you want a real dark gray. You may have to use fresh paint right from the tube to be able to get paint that's that dark and concentrated. When you work wet on wet, the paint will dry much lighter than it looks while it's wet, so don't hesitate to go nice and dark. Start with the darkest cloud at the top. If your paint spreads too much, you can let the paper dry for a minute or two, or add more paint to your puddle of dark. As you move down the paper, you want the clouds to get a little bit lighter. So for the cloud on the left, I'm adding a little blue to my dark mix to make it just a shade lighter. For the third cloud, add even more blue or just some water, so it's another shade lighter. While the clouds are this wet, you can add in more paint if you want them to be darker on the bottom, or just get a feel for working wet on wet. You want your clouds to have some variety, some really dark ominous areas, and some lighter areas. But the clouds do become lighter and smaller as they approach the horizon line. mostly because those are farther away. To get my clouds really lighter, I'm just adding a little more water to my dark. My paper is still damp and nicely workable. And once again, I'm adding a bit of darker paint at the bottom of this cloud too. If you have areas that you don't like, maybe it's spread too much, you can use a small brush, one that's just damp, and you can soften the edges or move the paint around. You could also use this brush to pick up paint. When you're working on paper that's wet on both sides, you have a lot of time to fiddle with your skies. I'm softening the top edges of this cloud, but I like the way the color's running down at the bottom. It looks like distant rain to me. Next, paint the bottom. When you're happy with your clouds, it's time to paint the foreground. Hopefully your paper is still wet. If you have leftover dark color, mix in a little yellow to make a dark greenish color. For the bottom, I'm going to use some of my dark green color that I just mixed, some of my dark blue-gray, and a little bit of brown. It's nice if you can get the bottom painted while the sky is still damp, so you can get soft edges. If it spreads too much into your sky, tilt the top of your paper up and use gravity to help keep the paint down at the bottom where you want it. I'm dipping my brush in my dark green, and then I'm adding in a little brown in areas that go diagonally. I'm not adding just spots of brown here and there. This side is a little bit drier, but it's still working. When the foreground's done, dry the whole thing pretty well. With the sky finished, it's time to paint the house. I'm using leftover color and a small brush. Your house could be any color you like, but I suggest keeping the color muted so the house doesn't stand out. I used darker paint to outline some windows and trim, and I add a suggestion of a fence in the front yard. The lightning is painted with opaque white paint. I'm using Pro White by Daler-Rowney Company, and I think I'll start at the bottom. You want the top of your lightning to emerge from the bottom of one of the dark clouds. Lines of lightning are not straight lines. They're a little bit jagged, so if your hand shakes, that would be perfect. Some of the lines can be lighter, and that will make them look a little bit farther away, like this one on the left. How about some rain? The clouds seem to be going to the left, so the rain can go to the left too. Here's a number 6 brush that's just damp. I'm rubbing lines to activate the paint and lift up just a little bit of paint. Then wipe the lifted paint on a paper towel and keep going. How much rain do you think you need? You could do this all day. For finishing touches, I'm going to add some birds flying in the sky, trying to get away from the storm. I want most of the birds going in one direction, and I'll have them going towards the house. Don't forget to add the light in the window, or maybe 2, to add warmth and a feeling of safety in this dismal storm. To add a light to a dark window, dot in some white paint, dry it well, and add a touch of yellow over top. Your sky will probably not look like mine. Every painting is unique, and Wet on wet watercolor is especially unique. You never know what it's going to do. For more fun painting tutorials, check out my website. All the tutorials are free. Happy painting!